So thanks very much for joining us. And it's great to have so many of you here and still more joining as we speak as well. And so my name's Caroline. I'm the Policy and National Programmes Manager at the Foundation. And alongside funding great work by frontline charities, so all of you guys in the room, one of our key ambitions at the Foundation is to help small charities to influence change. And we've been working with Asylum Matters for the last 2 years to support small and local organisations to help influence change locally, regionally and nationally to better support asylum seekers and refugees. For those of you that don't know Asylum Matters, they're a small charity that campaigns for the rights of refugees and people seeking asylum. And a key part of what they do is helping small organisations to get involved in influencing change. So that can be connecting charities into national campaigns, providing briefings and resources to make it easier for you to get involved in influencing, and also connecting up charities on issues that are affecting organisations locally and regionally as well. And so Asylum Matters work across a range of different issues, but we're organising this briefing today specifically about the Nationality and Borders Bill. I'm really pleased that Andrea and Mably from Asylum Matters are here and will be providing more information about implications of the bill and how you can get involved. But we wanted to organise this briefing because the implications of this legislation are really profound, and we want to make sure that charities have the opportunity to raise their voice and try and get involved in campaigning around that bill before it becomes legislation. And we wanted to also widen it out so that we're not just, it's not only charities that are specifically supporting asylum seekers and refugees that are involved in this, but also there's lots of charities that we fund working across issues from homelessness to domestic abuse to mental health, who are also supporting asylum seekers and refugees in the work that they do. And so making sure that those charities can be involved in this work as well. And we think it's particularly important to raise awareness of how you can get involved, particularly after what we've all recently seen unfold in Afghanistan, and really shining a spotlight on what it means to flee and then why the proposed legislation is so harmful. So I hope that today will provide a useful overview of the changes that have been set, and also give you more information about how you can get involved in influencing if you are keen to get your voice heard as well. So really pleased that Andrea and Mably will be going through all that in a bit more detail. But before we do that, we just wanted to launch a very quick poll to understand a bit more about the people in the room and what your involvement has been to date. So hopefully you have got some questions that have popped up on your screen. This is not a test. We're not going to be, it doesn't matter if you don't know so much, but if it's just helpful for us to get a sense of how much people know already, and how involved you've already been in this work. So we've got quite a broad range of organisations joining us today. We'll just give that a minute while looks like people are still completing. Just do a few more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. 1 second. And hopefully you can see the results now. So the vast majority of organisations work with people in the asylum system, a real mix of whether charities get involved in campaigning or not, and a real mix about how much people know already about the bill. So thank you very much for just giving that insight, and I will hand over to Andrea and Mably.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Caroline, for that introduction, and thanks for the results of the poll. It's really useful to have a bit of background to who's joining us today. I will share my screen and hope, that works. Does that work? Am I sharing my screen? I see nodding. Okay, great. Great. So yeah, we prepared a PowerPoint presentation just to hopefully make this a little bit more interactive and interesting. So as Caroline has said, I'm the director of Asylum Matters, actually co-director. I'm doing a job share with my colleague Paul, and Mably, who will be doing the presentation with me, is our deputy director. And yeah, I thought I'd start just by giving a little bit more background to Asylum Matters. As Caroline has said, we are an organization that supports supports mainly small local frontline charities who work with people in the asylum system to get involved in campaigning. We really try to bridge the gap between asylum policy and practice, so mobilizing our regional networks to collect evidence about the impact of policies on people going through the asylum system, and try to channel that evidence and information into the national policy debate, as we often see that there is a bit of a disconnect there otherwise. We try to reinforce the links between local and national in campaigning, so really trying to facilitate collaboration between local organizations and national agencies. And trying to ensure that when, for example, lobbying MPs, they're hearing the same messages when they're meeting with us and others at Westminster as they are from their constituents. We try to build voice and local campaigning capacity. So many of the organizations that we work with, I imagine, are quite similar to yours in terms of focusing predominantly on providing services to people in the asylum system, and perhaps having little time, capacity, or even sort of inclination to get involved in campaigning for broader structural change. And so our aim as Asylum Matters is to really support those kind of agencies with the confidence, with the skills, with the materials and guidance that they would need to, for example, go and talk to their MP or take action on any of the issues they're seeing in the asylum system. So really lowering the barriers to entry. And finally, we act as a kind of catalyst and convener of campaigning action. So intrinsic to the way we work is partnership and partnership working and sort of coalition working. And we're involved in a number of joint initiatives. You may know some of the more formal coalitions we're part of. So there's Lift the Ban, which is around giving people seeking asylum the right to work, which we co-lead with our partners at Refugee Action. And then we also have other sort of more informal partnership working models, like some of our work around improving asylum accommodation standards for people in the asylum system. In addition to myself, Mably, and my job share partner, we have a regional campaigns manager based across the Northwest, the Northeast, West Midlands, Yorkshire and Humberside, and in Wales. So kind of reflecting some of the areas that receive significant numbers of people seeking asylum. So yeah, in terms of this presentation around the Nationality and Borders Bill, I thought we'd start by giving a bit of background in terms of the political context. So many of you will, of course, know, but since the last election in 2019, the Conservative Party has a really significant majority in Parliament of 80 seats, which means that they are very much in control. And most, if not all, of the legislation that's going through Parliament will have little chance of being stopped. And unfortunately, that includes the Nationality and Borders Bill, dubbed by campaigners the Anti-Refugee Bill. Many of the seats that were gained by the Tories during the last election were in traditionally so-called red wall areas. So some of the constituencies across the Midlands and Northern England that historically belonged to Labour. Most of those seats voted to leave the EU by substantial margins. So Brexit is very likely to have played a significant role in those seats changing hands. And that's kind of important context because much of government policymaking remains very much based on ensuring that there's a continuous appeal to that supporter base. We know that the government is very much led by public polling, by focus groups, so public opinion remains absolutely paramount. When it comes to asylum and migration, policymaking tends to be underpinned by a belief that a tough approach to migration to asylum will be better received by the public. The government really doesn't want to appear to be soft touch on migration. There's also this ongoing belief that more generous policies will constitute a kind of pull factor and will attract more people to come to the UK. In the last few months, we have seen an increasing number of people who are crossing the channel in small boats, and that's provided the government with a real opportunity to sort of talk about this migrant crisis, to manufacture a crisis, to show that they're being tough on stopping illegal migration and cracking down on people smugglers. And you'll probably have seen there have been lots of headline grabbing statements coming out of the Home Office talking about how they will stop channel crossings. There's the ongoing spat with the French about policing the beaches, taking people back, of course, paying for some of those their efforts to stop people crossing the channel. There was the news as well that the Home Office had authorized pushbacks of boats in the channel, despite widespread agreement that there's no legal basis to carry that out, not to mention it's incredibly dangerous for the people on those small flimsy vessels. There was a very public row with the RNLI, who save people at sea, including, of course, those who are attempting the crossing, and the likes of Farage weighing into the debate. In the Nationality and Borders Bill, RNLI crew members will be criminalized for helping people in distress in the channel, but they fantastically continue to very proudly defend their work. We don't have time for me to show you the video, but I would recommend, if you haven't seen it already, they've done a fantastic video called "Why We Save Migrants," and it talks about their work in the channel, which is definitely worth a watch. But in any case, there's this sort of building sense of crisis, that our borders are under threat, that we're being inundated with arrivals. And from the government's perspective, that's really been necessary to provide justification for this bill. As I mentioned, the bill will criminalize people who travel to the UK via irregular routes, which means in small boats or in the back of lorries. And of course, at a time when there are no safe and legal routes, that remains the only option for a number of people. But it is just important to offer a bit more of a nuanced picture in terms of the actual number of people who are claiming asylum in the UK. Those numbers remain relatively low. So the overall number of people who claim asylum in the UK has actually decreased by 24% in the last year. But there has been a sort of perfect storm of poor Home Office planning, a record backlog of unresolved cases, which I think has topped 120,000, and then fewer people moving on from the asylum system in the last year, given the coronavirus pandemic. And all that has kind of created the impression that we're being overwhelmed by asylum arrivals. So that's the sort of context in which the bill is being proposed. And I will pass over to Madly, who will talk about some of the key aspects of the bill.
Yeah, so thanks, Andrea. So I think, yeah, obviously it's interesting seeing how many of you said, whether you were aware of like the key elements of the bill. And it is worth saying, I think the majority of people either weren't really sure, or just somewhat aware. So it is like, it's a big piece of legislation, and it is quite complex as well. And I don't think it's had like a huge amount of awareness so far, or like real scrutiny in the media. So we'll obviously see a lot of that increase now as it comes, makes its way through Parliament and gets more scrutiny and discussion that way. But fundamentally, and you'll see this with the language a lot of organisations, including ourselves, using that, we're calling this like the anti-refugee bill, because what it's going to do is, fundamentally rewrite our whole system of giving people protection through the asylum system. So some of the things, key aspects then are, it's going to make things worse for people in the asylum system. It's going to sort of fundamentally like undermine that right that we have established about people's right to seek safety. And it's going to stop, people who are able to come over to the UK from being able to rebuild their lives. So one of the main things it's going to do, which is unprecedented, is to create a two-tier system within the asylum system that's based on the journey that you made to get here rather than your actual case and your need for protection. So it means that if you come here, as Andrea said, if you arrive in like what's called like an irregular route, you're going to be penalised for that, even if that was the only way you could get here, even if you have an incredible incredibly strong claim for protection and have really been like fleeing for your life. So you're automatically going to be criminalized and threatened with deportation on that basis. And your claim is going to be defined as inadmissible just on the basis of how you got here, because you'll have travelled through what the government is calling a safe country, which is France. And as Andrea mentioned, that's a sort of ongoing issue. So the government is saying that what they're going to do then is try and return people to the countries that they've travelled through. But, that when everything's based on that, they have no agreements with other countries in place to do those returns. It's unlikely they're going to be able to secure them as well. And the idea then would be if after 6 months that you weren't able to be returned, that you would be entered then into the asylum system. So it makes the whole process just a lot longer and more bureaucratic. Also plans to house people in large accommodation centres. It's not entirely clear at the moment what they're going to look like, but from some of the things we've seen over the last year or so, with the use of military barracks, they're not likely to be appropriate facilities for vulnerable people, and particularly families with children. And we're really concerned, and I'm sure a lot of you will be, as like smaller organisations who work in the community, we're really concerned about that move away from community housing and allowing people to sort of settle and rebuild their lives locally. There's also talk about establishing offshore processing centres. So that would be these kind of big accommodation centres, but not in the UK. But again, there's not a huge amount of detail about that, but we can look at international examples. Like there are infamous examples from Australia where they house people in Nauru, and we know, when it's been done in other countries, that's led to appalling human rights abuses. So then at the end of that sort of process, if the government does decide that you need protection and that your claim is valid, the status that you're going to get, the immigration status you're going to get, is going to be like a very new form that they're coming up with, which is going to be incredibly precarious and temporary and only last for 30 months. So you'd have the potential of being deported then every 30 months. So you also won't have the opportunity to reunite with your family. So people's ongoing experience then of staying in the UK is going to be much more insecure, much more precarious for everyone. So then we've got what's the actual impact of this all going to be on our asylum system and the people within it. We know that it's going to separate families. It's going to lead to more dangerous journeys, because even though the government is talking about prioritising safe and legal routes to settlement, it's got actually no commitment or plans to do that at the moment, or expanding some of the other safe routes that exist, like family reunion. So ultimately, people are not going to have a choice other than to come via those irregular routes and risk their lives to do so, and then be criminalised when they get here. It's going to create even longer backlogs and delays in the asylum process, because it's going to build in that additional 6-month delay before your case is even considered. And I know those of you who are working on the front lines will know that our asylum system is already incredibly bureaucratic and inefficient, and people are left in limbo for long enough already, so it's going to make that worse. People will also be forced into greater poverty because of that longer wait in limbo. And, like we know, the levels of support that people are expected to live on in the asylum system are incredibly low. And coming back to that point about the limited leave to remain that people are going to be offered once they do get refugee status, is going to be much, much harder then to rebuild your life, find like a long-term secure employment or education opportunities, and reunite with your loved ones and sort of really settle in your new community. And then as a result of that as well, more people are going to be at risk of becoming undocumented because you're going to be forced to renew your status every 30 months, which again, as any of you who work in the immigration system will know, that tends to be a very complex and costly process. So we're probably going to end up with more people being forced out and becoming undocumented as a result of that too.
Sorry, just coming off mute. Yeah, so in terms of how we've responded to that, I mean, I guess the first thing to say is that we know that the bill, as I mentioned, is most likely going to go through. It is possible that we will see significant fights around some amendments to the bill. So one example could be around lift the ban and the right to work for people seeking asylum. You might have seen recent reports that there are a growing number of Tory MPs, including a few cabinet ministers, who are increasingly coming out in support of lifting the ban, likely related to labor shortages. But I mean, apart from a handful of amendments, which potentially could go through or otherwise could see significant support, we will see this bill passing. Once the bill is passed, the battle for us in the sector for many years is going to be to repeal or to change the anti-refugee laws, to mitigate them and to fight them in the courts. For that reason, trying to oppose the bill now when it's going through Parliament will really help us lay the framework for activities in the future. I think there's a real concern that when this bill comes into effect, that when it completely overhauls the asylum system as we know it, it just becomes business as usual. It becomes normal that we treat people seeking asylum as criminals. It becomes normal that we leave people living in limbo in massive reception centers far from the public gaze. And so what we're trying to do and what we really need to do is fight against the sort of gradual but tacit acceptance of this becoming our new normal. And in order to do that, we're trying to build a refugee protection movement, including through support for Together with Refugees, which I'll mention in a second. We're trying to demonstrate to opposition parties, in particular Labour, that their base really cares about this issue and to provide them with the popular cover that they need to strongly come out against the bill. We want to increase the prospects for more moderate Tories to engage constructively with our concerns, whether that's publicly or privately. Again, we don't think a significant number of Tories will come out and vote against the bill, vote against the party. But sort of pulling the center of gravity of opposition to the bill closer to our side means that we create that space for Tories who are concerned about some elements of this bill, even if it's just from a perspective of increasing the cost to the asylum system or increasing the backlog or the kind of operationalization of the bill, but trying to engage them with some of our concerns is fundamental. And then trying to lay the groundwork for, as I mentioned, future campaigning when we're going to be looking to repeal the various anti-refugee laws. So the sector has really come together to challenge the bill. We've seen widespread lobbying and outreach to MPs, and that's both at a Westminster level and a constituency level. We've got a number of briefings which have really tried to pick apart the various provisions in the bill, including commissioning legal opinions to show how it actually undermines international law. As I mentioned, we've got the Together with Refugees Coalition, which is one vehicle that we can use to sort of build that broad support for a kind of fair and more effective asylum system. And that's really focused on trying to bring the public with us on this journey towards a kind of more compassionate asylum system. So really aiming to work with organizations and individuals from outside our sector as well. We're obviously looking at popular mobilization tactics, and we'll talk about the week of action that we're organizing next week in just a minute. But generally looking at kind of creative campaigning and media opportunities to really get this issue on the radar of the public at large. And I thought I'd show you just one video from one organization working in the sector, which I thought was a really creative way of trying to raise awareness about the sort of general anti-refugee policies and stance of the government. And that's by One Strong Voice. They are a organization that's led by people with lived experience of the asylum system. And they did a brilliant stunt at Conservative Party conference last week or the week before. And I'll just show you a clip from that. Yeah, I thought I'd share that one just because it's a great example of a kind of creative campaigning tactic to get the issue on the radar, of course, of politicians and targeting the Conservative Party conference last week, but also of the public more generally. And then I thought I'd just mention briefly in terms of our kind of comms messaging in response to the anti-refugee bill, a big part of our work has really been to challenge, as Mably said, this two-tier system of protection, which is punishing people who come to the UK via irregular routes. And as Caroline outlined at the start of our session, the Afghanistan crisis really provided a good opportunity for us to kind of capitalize on the public warmth that people were feeling at the time towards refugees and explain really how nonsensical this two-tier system is, because it would offer protection and the chance to rebuild their lives to people who come from Afghanistan via the frankly very limited sort of schemes that the government has put in place. But in just a few weeks or months' time, when we see people fleeing the Taliban from Afghanistan coming to the UK, turning up on our shores, it will criminalize those people and threaten them with deportation back to Afghanistan. So, I mean, with this crisis, it was the first time in a long time that the government has really been on the back foot on refugee protection. And from a public perspective, they were able to kind of watch in real time what it actually means to flee your home practically in the middle of the night and do whatever you can to really to reach safety. And for the first time, it feels like there's an opportunity to explain why someone might end up putting their lives in the hands of people smugglers and attempting to cross the channel. So we've really been trying to kind of use that as a hook to talk about the broader issues with the refugee bill, but not just from a comms perspective, because the refugee bill will genuinely have an impact on people from Afghanistan who are fleeing the Taliban who come to the UK in the future. We've also tried to look at the issue from the perspective of international law. We've had powerful statements from the likes of the UNHCR, who have said that the refugee bill is very much contrary to the Refugee Convention. Just yesterday, Freedom from Torture released a legal opinion that they commissioned of leading human rights lawyers who concluded that the bill breaches international and domestic law in at least 10 different ways. And then, of course, there's all of the commentary that we've seen around how the bill is undermining, of course, maritime law in particular, with some of the plans for pushbacks of people in the Channel. Quite unfortunately, this government doesn't seem to care much about law, but it's certainly very important for our campaigning that we continue to make that point. Another really important narrative for us to counter is the kind of urban myth of the pull factor. So this idea that a softer approach, a kind of more generous package of support to people seeking asylum, will encourage even more to come to the UK. And this is something those of us working on asylum and refugee issues for a number of years know is very much an urban myth, as far as we can see. And we've looked at this quite extensively through Lift the Ban. There's no published research to substantiate this claim. Asylum seekers, of course, are not sort of rational economic actors and are often completely unaware of the kind of support system in place in a country in which they're seeking protection. To the extent that they do have choice or agency or control over their movements, it does tend to be based on things like the presence of family members or speaking a certain language or historical colonial links. And then linked to this is another significant kind of counter that we've heard from the government and from a number of Conservative MPs, which is, well, why don't people just claim asylum in another safe country? Why don't people just stay in France? There's no war in France. And rather than answering that question myself, I thought I'd show you another video of one of our partners from JCWI, who was invited to give evidence to the Bill Committee a couple of weeks ago and was asked that specific question by a Conservative MP, and her answer is quite powerful and worth listening to.
If these people in Calais are legitimate refugees, why are they not claiming asylum in France, Italy, Spain, or Greece? Why do they need to come to the United Kingdom?
As I'm sure you'll be aware, because I think the previous witness did say this, the vast majority of people who seek asylum worldwide, firstly, 86% of refugees and displaced people worldwide remain in the country neighbouring the one they have fled. So 86% of people remain in developing countries. France received 3 times as many asylum applications as we did last year. Most people stop as soon as they feel safe. But the people who are making their way to England and who specifically wish to come to the UK do so because they have ties to this country, because they either have served with our military, as in the case of people from Afghanistan, or have family members, as with the Syrian client that I mentioned, that JCWI is representing, or speak the language because of our colonial history and have other ties of kinship and history here. So there are people who have legitimate ties to the UK, and there is no good reason why they should particularly have their claims assessed in France if they do not wish to. It doesn't really work for us to say to the French that, given that we're geographically located slightly to the west of you, none of these refugees are our responsibility and they're all on you, because France can say the same thing, and then Italy can say the same thing, and then the entire international refugee protection system will crumble.
Yeah, I thought that was worth sharing, a really good answer to a kind of key question that is continuously asked around the bill. And hopefully if any of you go and meet MPs or engage in debates, you would find that useful as well. I'll hand over to Madly now, who's going to talk a bit about the week of action. If I can just move to the next slide.
Yes, so as Andrea said, the aim and what's been happening so far is the whole sector sort of coming together against like the government's plans. And a big part of this is mobilising in our communities and at a local level to show that the government that actually their claims that what they're doing has public support is not right, and having MPs as well get the message that their constituents want a fairer and more effective approach to asylum and don't support this bill. So the plan is to have a week of action, which is actually next week from the 18th to the 24th of October, where we've been working with smaller partners and supporters all across the UK to come together and show that the bill doesn't have support. And the reason that it's next week is that the bill's currently making its way through Parliament, as we said, and at the end of the month it's going to be returning to the Bill Committee in Parliament, where it'll have line by line scrutiny. So the idea is to have a big push next week before that happens. And the way to do that is by mobilising. So it's really, really important that people are vocal and visible in their local communities and tell their MPs and other decision makers that they want this different approach. So the week of action is one opportunity to do that. So what we've been doing is encouraging people all over the UK to organise events and activities in their local community, and those events are taking lots of different forms, from sort of large rallies and protest events to small gatherings where you have like local charities, people with lived experience, MPs and other local figures coming together. Also things like visual stunts or activities to be placed in local media, people setting up campaign stores just to talk to people on their local high street and gather signatures for a petition against the bill, and also encouraging those members of the public to learn a bit more about the plans and tell their MPs that they don't support it. And in terms of the messaging around the week of action, there's a lot that's going to just be around like signalling kind of broader support and solidarity with refugees. One of the ways people can do that is through using the orange heart symbol of the Together with Refugees coalition. And then there are other people who are going to focus a lot more explicitly on the threat that the bill poses, and calling for that to be scrapped. So some of the stuff that is planned, there's a big refugees welcome rally in London on the afternoon of Wednesday the 20th next week, which is going to be in Parliament Square. We're going to be there as well, so by the Churchill statue there. So if you are in London or planning to come up that day, then go along to that, and I'll put the link to some information about that rally in the chat as well. There are also like smaller like solidarity rallies for that taking place in different places. We've got people in Halifax organising an event with their local leaders and councillors to talk about it. There's a briefing event for Welsh MPs and MSs on Monday, and there are lots of little activities going on in schools and local libraries. So there's like a real breadth of different things going on. So we'd encourage any of you who are around next week to go and join in or support any of the activities that are happening in your local area. So I've put a link in the chat to the Together with Refugees page, where they've got a list that they're updating of the various local events that they're aware of. You can also, of course, show support during the week just on social media, and you can follow us on Twitter as well, where you'll see like we'll be posting updates about what's going on and showing some of the events that our colleagues will be at too. So as part of the week of action, and whether you're able to like attend things during the week or not, the really key thing for everyone to do is to contact their MPs. So either during the week of action or afterwards. It's incredibly important, like for all the reasons that Andrea outlined earlier. It's really, really important for MPs to be hearing from constituents about this. So we've got some resources on our website that I'll put the link in the chat to as well, that you can use, which are like templates to your MP and guides on how to engage your MP and other decision makers. So feel free to use and adapt any of them. We've also got a specific letter actually for MPs who are on the committee for the bill. So if that's your MP, then I'll put the link there to that letter that you can use. And it's crucial as well when we're talking about lobbying your MPs and talking to them, that includes MPs that you don't think will be supportive, because and including, you know, conservative backbenchers and everything, because it's, if anything, more important that they're hearing from constituents saying this isn't what we stand for, we want something different. So in terms of when you're talking to some of those MPs who you don't think will be supportive, just things to keep in mind, you know, the general advice applies, but think as well a bit about, is there like a particular thing in their interests or their background that would give you like a way in to talk to them about this issue, work with others to meet with them, and seeking out like possibly if there's like a community connection there. Remember as well, you know, a lot of them will have very little understanding of the reality of the asylum system. We found when you talk to MPs who are initially not supportive, when they do actually learn a bit about the realities of people's experiences, they can be quite shocked. And, you know, related to that, if possible, like make sure that there are people in that meeting with lived experience who can and want to talk about their story, because again, you know, that's the most powerful thing for changing MPs' minds. And yeah, thinking as well about, you know, some of those issues that can provide like a particular hook. We know like the situation in Afghanistan has obviously had a lot of public sympathy, and it's a way in for a lot of MPs who aren't traditionally supportive. Same with the Lift the Ban campaign actually, which has got huge cross-party support, as Andrea said. And you know, when we're talking about the bill with those MPs, it's important as well to talk about, like we said earlier, that there's a lot, the bill's very cruel and it's very inhumane, but it's also going to be like incredibly ineffective and not actually achieve what the government says it will. It'll make the Home Office even more bureaucratic and expensive. So it's really important to make that point when we're talking to those MPs too. And yeah, lastly, just always remember, you know, like MPs respond to pressure, particularly from their constituents. So make sure that you're talking to them from that perspective and use it then to build like an ongoing relationship with them. So just to recap then, in terms of what you can do to sort of get involved and support some of this work. So yeah, get involved in the Week of Action, get in touch with the MP and join the Together with Refugees coalition, particularly not particularly, but including if you don't actually work in like the refugee or migration sector yourself. That coalition is, you know, and all this work is for people who are supported from outside the sector too, and it's incredibly valuable to have that support from people who are in different sectors. There's a petition by Refugee Action calling on the government to drop the bill, so I'll put that in the chat, and that takes half a minute to sign, so if you do one thing you can do that first. And then lastly, you can sign up to our mailing list where we'll sort of send out, you know, regular updates about the bill and also just asylum issues in general, and you can also follow us on Twitter to keep up with that too.